My brother called it the dirt pile. That's what he said, right there in front of the attorney, right there in front of our mother's framed photos still sitting on the shelf in her living room. He looked at me, smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Well, Hazel, at least it fits. You always did love playing in the dirt." Everyone laughed. My sister-in-law covered her mouth like she was trying to hide it. My aunt just looked away. I sat there holding the envelope Mr. Faulkner had just handed me, and I thought, okay, I will not cry in this room. My brother got the house, our childhood home in Raleigh. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, the backyard where Mom used to grow tomatoes, market value somewhere around $340,000. My sister-in-law had already been mentally redecorating it for 2 years. Everyone knew that. I got 43 acres of undeveloped land in rural Appalachian, Virginia. No structure on it, no utilities connected, just land, trees, and a gravel road that may or may not still be passable. Mom had never once mentioned it to me. I found out later she'd inherited it from her own uncle decades ago and just held on to it, paid the property taxes every year without a word to anyone. She left it to me specifically, not split between us, not split 3 ways including our younger brother Kevin, just me. In the will she wrote, "For Hazel, who always listened when I talked about the mountains." I didn't even know what that meant at the time. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is, even now. He didn't let it go after the attorney's office. He called me that night. "Did you even look it up?" he asked. Not hello, not how are you doing, just straight into it. I looked at the county map, I said. "It's nothing, Hazel. It's literally a patch of forest in the middle of nowhere. There's no road access worth talking about. There's no water hookup. There might not even be clear title because Mom never did anything with it." Mr. Faulkner said the title is clear. Faulkner is a small-town attorney who hasn't updated his office furniture since 1987. I'm just saying, you might want to think about whether it's worth holding on to something you'll be paying taxes on forever. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was devastated about the land. I genuinely didn't know what to think about it yet. I didn't sleep because of what he'd said at the attorney's office. It fits. You always did love playing in the dirt. He'd said it like it was nothing, like it was just a joke, and everyone had laughed. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist. I've been working at a pediatric rehabilitation center for 6 years. I'm not some flighty person who stumbles through life. I have a 401k. I have renter's insurance. I am, by every reasonable measure, a functioning adult. But in that room, with that comment, I was 12 years old again, and he was 17, and I was the little sister who didn't matter. I want to be careful here because this story isn't really about my brother being a villain. It's more complicated than that. He'd always been the one my parents pointed to. Good grades, business degree, bought his first house at 26. I was the one who took 6 years to finish my undergrad because I changed my major twice and worked 3 jobs during it. I was the one who moved back home briefly at 24 when a relationship ended badly and I needed to get back on my feet. In his mind, I think, the hierarchy was just a fact. It wasn't cruelty, it was just the order of things. But sometimes the order of things needs to be examined. 3 weeks after the will was read, I drove out to see the land. I want to be honest, I almost didn't go. I told myself it was a long drive. It was, about 5 hours from where I live in Charlotte. And I told myself I was busy, I was. And I told myself it would probably just make me sad to see a bunch of empty woods and come back with nothing resolved. But something kept pulling at me. The line in my mother's will, who always listened when I talked about the mountains. I drove up on a Friday after my last patient appointment. It took me almost until dark to get there. The county road turned into a gravel road, like my brother had said, but it was passable, a little rough, but nothing my Subaru couldn't handle. I pulled over at the edge of the property line, which was marked with old orange survey tape that had faded to almost pink. I got out of the car and just stood there. I don't have poetic language for what it looked like. It was October, so the leaves were turning red and orange, and that deep gold that only lasts about 2 weeks before everything goes brown. The land sloped up away from the road, and through the trees I could hear what sounded like running water somewhere higher up. The air smelled like cold soil and pine. I stood there for a long time. Then I started walking. I hiked probably a mile in before my phone lost signal completely. The ground was rocky, but the tree coverage was remarkable. Mostly hardwood, some old-growth oak that had to be 80, 90 years old. I found the water source, a creek, narrow but clear, running across the upper portion of the property. I sat down on a rock next to the creek and I thought about my mum. She'd grown up in Western Virginia. She talked about it sometimes. Not constantly, but in the way people talk about places that shaped them. The way the mountains looked in winter, the sound of creek water. She'd moved away at 19 for a job opportunity and never moved back, but something in her had stayed there. I used to sit with her on Sunday mornings when I was in high school and she'd have her coffee, and sometimes she'd just start talking about being a kid, up in the hills, and I'd listen. My brother was always somewhere else on Sunday mornings. He had things to do. I think she left me this land because she knew I would actually come here. I drove back down to the nearest town, a small place called Harlan Springs, about 8 miles from the property, and found a motel that charged $65 a night and smelled faintly of cedar. I ate dinner at a diner across the street. The woman at the counter was probably in her 60s, friendly, and when I mentioned I'd inherited some land up on the Ridge Road, she got very still for a moment. "Which parcel?" she asked. I described the location as best I could. She nodded slowly. "Your family, the Callaway side or the Morrison side?" I told her my mom's maiden name. She nodded again, slower this time. "That's old land," she said. "That's whole ridgeline. There's been some interest in it lately. Timber rights mostly. Some energy folks came through maybe a year and a half ago asking questions. I asked what kind of energy. Wind assessment, they said. Something about the elevation. I drove home Sunday morning with a lot more questions than I'd arrived with. I did not tell my brother about the conversation at the diner. I spent the next 2 weeks doing research I should have done immediately. I pulled the property records from the county assessor's office, easy enough to do online. The parcel was 43.7 acres, assessed for property tax purposes at about $38,000, which is not the same as market value. I started calling around. I spoke to a land broker who specialized in rural Appalachian properties in Virginia. She asked me for the parcel ID and called me back the next morning. "I don't want to get ahead of anything," she said, "but this is worth having a proper appraisal done. The ridgeline parcels in this area have been moving. A comparable parcel sold 8 months ago for just over $119,000 to a timber company. There's also been wind energy development interest in the county. They're leasing mineral and surface rights from landowners for turbine access. $200,000 worth of nothing and a dirt pile." I hung up the phone and sat very quietly in my apartment for about 10 minutes. Then I called an attorney. Not Mr. Faulkner, though I have nothing against him, but a real estate attorney in Richmond who specialized in rural land and natural resource rights. Her name was Ms. Abernathy, and she had 20 years of experience and a very calm, clear way of explaining things that I found immediately reassuring. She told me the first thing I needed to do was get a formal survey done if the existing one was more than 10 years old. It was 22 years old. The second thing was to have a timber cruiser assess the standing timber value. The third was to respond to any future inquiries about the land only through her office. "Do not," she said clearly, "discuss the property's potential value with family members until we have a clearer picture. People behave unexpectedly when land value becomes apparent." I thought about my brother's phone call. "You might want to think about whether it's worth holding on to." "I understand," I said. The survey took 6 weeks. The timber assessment took another 3. During that time, my brother called twice. Both times he steered the conversation around to the land. Casual, curious seeming, but pointed. How was I thinking about it? Had I looked into selling? He knew a guy who did rural property acquisitions if I was interested. No pressure, just wanted to help. I told him I was still figuring things out. On the second call, he said something I've thought about since. He said, "Look, I'm just saying, property like that, you don't want it sitting there costing you money. Tax bill on undeveloped acreage isn't going to be nothing." The tax bill, for the record, was $6,122 per year. I said I could manage that. He paused. "Then, did something happen?" You seem different. I'm just being careful, I said. There was another pause. Faulkner, tell you something? I'm just being careful, I said again. He didn't call back for a while after that. The appraisal came in at $224,000 for the land as is. The timber value was assessed separately at approximately $67,000 for the harvestable standing timber, which I would not necessarily harvest. That was just the assessed worth. And Miss Abernathy had been in contact with 2 wind energy development companies that had flagged the county as an area of interest. One of them had reached out directly to her office after she registered herself as the contact attorney for the parcel. They wanted to discuss a long-term surface and wind rights lease. I want to tell you, I was calm and businesslike through all of this. I was not. I called my best friend Danny one night, and I was shaking slightly when I told her the numbers, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I started crying, not sad crying, just that release crying that happens when something enormous sits in your chest for too long and finally gets let out. Your mum knew, Danny said. I think she might have, I said. I think about that a lot. I don't know how much my mother understood about the land's potential. She wasn't a developer or an investor. She was a retired school librarian from Raleigh, but she held on to that land for decades. She paid those taxes every single year, and she left it specifically to me, the daughter everyone kind of wrote off as the one who took longer, struggled more, needed more time to figure things out. Maybe she always believed I'd figure it out. My brother found out, not from me, when the county property records updated with the new survey filing. I assume he or his wife checks things like that, or maybe someone told him, or maybe it was just the kind of information that travels. He called me on a Tuesday evening and his voice was different, careful, measured. I saw there was some activity on the land filing, he said. I had a survey done. How come? Because I'm deciding what to do with the property. Standard step. A long pause. Did you get it appraised? I told him I had. Another pause. And? I'm working through things with my attorney, I said. I'll let you know if anything develops that affects the family. Hazel. His voice shifted slightly. Look, I want to be honest with you. When the estate was divided, I think maybe I underestimated the land. If there was a mistake made in terms of equity between us, there was no mistake, I said. Mom decided. Mom didn't have full information, though. She probably thought she was leaving you a sentimental piece of property. She didn't know it had. She left it to me, I said. That's what the will says. It's not ambiguous. A longer pause. I'm not trying to challenge the will. Good, I said. Because there's nothing to challenge. I will be honest with you. That conversation cost me something. Not sleep. I slept fine that night, actually, which surprised me. But it cost me some version of my brother I'd been holding on to. The version where maybe we were just different, where the hierarchy was just an unspoken thing that didn't mean anything. After that call, I couldn't pretend anymore that it was just his personality. He called twice more over the following months, each time walking back a little further from the challenge, and a little more toward a kind of apology that never quite got there. He brought up how hard the past year had been. He brought up Mum. He brought up Christmas. I was polite. I kept every conversation short, and I followed Miss Abernathy's advice. Nothing about the property discussed outside the attorney's office. The wind energy lease negotiation took 4 months. Miss Abernathy was excellent. She pushed back on the initial offer twice and got terms that were significantly better, including a much higher per acre annual payment and a clause that protected the timber rights as entirely mine, regardless of what happened with the surface lease. I also retained full access rights to the creek and the upper portion of the property. The lease signing happened on a Wednesday morning in Ms. Abernathy's Richmond office. It was not dramatic. There was no music. I signed my name several times. The company representative signed his, Ms. Mees. Abernathy reviewed everything one final time, and then it was done. The annual lease payment, which I receive every January, is more than what I was making in 4 months of work when I was 24, living at home, trying to get back on my feet. The land is still mine. The trees are still there. The creek is still running. I've been back to the property 3 times now. The second time I brought Danny and we hiked the whole ridgeline and ate sandwiches sitting against one of the big oaks and didn't talk very much. Just looked out through the trees at the mountains turning grey-blue in the distance, the way Virginia mountains do in the late afternoon. The third time I went alone, in February, when there was snow on the ground, and I walked up to the creek and stood there and let myself feel how quiet it was. My mum used to say that some things hold their value quietly. She was talking about antiques, I think. She collected old dishes. But I think about that line differently now. My brother and I are still in contact. Family is complicated, and I believe in trying. Last Thanksgiving, he said something that was almost an apology. He said he was glad I'd taken the land seriously. He said he should have encouraged me to look into it more carefully from the beginning. He said he was sorry if he'd made me feel dismissed. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. I said thank you, and I meant it, and then I passed in the sweet potatoes, and we talked about something else. The dirt pile made me financially stable in a way I'd spent most of my 20s trying to figure out how to be. I still work at the rehab center because my patients are kids who are learning to do things the world told them they might never do. And I love that work more than I can explain. But I go to work now without that low-grade panic underneath everything, that constant quiet worry about what happens if something goes wrong. It's October again as I'm writing this, almost exactly 2 years since I first drove up that gravel road and stood at the edge of the property in the fading light and didn't know what I was looking at. I know now. Mum knew too, I think. She just waited for me to be ready to find out. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the legal parts, not the numbers, but the sequence of choices that led to everything changing. My brother didn't lose anything because the universe decided to balance the scales. He lost the opportunity to be part of something good because of the way he'd always chosen to treat people he'd already decided were beneath him. That's not fate. That's just the very ordinary, very predictable result of how you move through the world over a long period of time. When you dismiss someone consistently enough, you stop paying attention to them, and when you stop paying attention, you miss things. He missed everything. I almost missed it too, for different reasons. I almost didn't drive up there. I almost let his voice in my head be louder than my own curiosity. That's the thing nobody talks about enough. How much damage the accumulated weight of being underestimated can do to your own instincts. I had learned somewhere along the way to preemptively agree that my things weren't worth much, that my choices were the lesser choices, that the slower path I'd taken meant I was slower, full stop. My mother didn't believe that. She held onto that land for decades and she put my name on it, and I think the most honest thing I can say is that she gave me the chance to find out what I was capable of when nobody was watching and nobody was grading me, and there was no older sibling in the room setting the curve. What I found out is that I'm pretty good at doing hard things quietly, at asking the right questions, at not flinching when the answer is complicated, at sitting with uncertainty long enough to let it become information. That's not a talent I was born with. It's a thing I built, slowly, through all the years that looked like falling behind. The job changes. The move back home at 24. The long road through school. None of that felt like preparation at the time. It felt like failure, with a longer run time. But it turns out that learning to keep going when things don't look the way you planned them is exactly the skill you need when something genuinely important lands in your hands. Hazel didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she was willing to drive 5 hours on a Friday after a full week of work to go look at something everyone had already told her wasn't worth looking at. She won because she sat with a stranger at a diner counter and actually listened. She won because she found Ms. Mandy. Abernathy entrusted the process and kept her mouth shut when every instinct said to defend herself out loud. Intelligence without patience is just noise. Integrity without follow-through is just intention. What actually moves things is the quiet, undramatic decision to keep showing up for yourself even when no one is applauding and nothing looks like it's working yet. My mum knew that. She spent her whole life demonstrating it in small ways I didn't fully understand until I was standing next to a creek in the Virginia mountains in October. realizing that the woman who collected old dishes and talked about the mountains on Sunday mornings had left me the most careful, most considered gift anyone has ever given me. Not the land, the belief that I was worth giving it to. That's the part I'm still working on accepting. And I think I will be for a while. But I'm okay with that. Some things hold their value quietly. Turns out I might be one of them.